Great. Well, good morning, everybody. And we're engaging one of the greatest figures of the 20th century and one of the greatest figures in the history of the church in general, and one of the greatest figures in the Catholic Church, to be sure. A person who is now given the appellation Saint Pope John the 23rd. And that is his proper title, is Saint Pope John the 23rd. But he was born in 1881 and he died in 1963. And in his 81 full years, he managed to basically revolutionize the church. There are some ironies or some contrast along the way, as you'll see. He was a big roly-poly man. When he was elected Pope in 1958, he wasn't considered to have been anything but a placeholder because Pope Pius had been such a powerful presence and longstanding, and but Pope John the 23rd turned out to be anything but a placeholder. So next slide. This is the covering the first part of his life, and these are his parents. Over on the left, he was part of a large family, although not all the family is even included here. He had, according to various accounts, and you'd think that I've had enough time to really research this, but he either had 13 siblings, there were 13 children in this family, or there were 14, and I cannot nail it down yet. But it was a large Catholic family. And very loving and very generous to one another, and very Catholic. On the left, you see him as a little boy. The middle picture in the lower part is him when he is 12 years old. And he will go to a seminary at the age of 12 to learn the Catholic faith and prepare for a life in the priesthood, basically. He's born in a little village called Sotto il Monte, which is west of Bergamo, and which is northeast of Milan. So basically, he's born in the northern part of Italy. He will become a priest at the age of 19. He will be ordained as a priest. He will receive his doctorate at the age of 21 and get a position in Rome very shortly thereafter. One of the things that he carries with him to the seminary and that propels him along his journey is the wonderful graciousness of Father Francesco Rebuzzini, who is the priest in his hometown. And when he would visit what is called the presbytery, where the father was of this hometown priest, he would see these words from Saint Bernard on the wall. Now, by the way, Pope John the 23rd, before he became a saint, that wasn't his given name. His given name was Angelo Giuseppe Roncalli. And remember Giuseppe, remember that's the Italian form of Joseph. This will come in handy a little bit later on. But I just want to repeat this, these adages, if you will, this wisdom, this guidance that Angelo, the little boy, saw every time he would go and hang out with the priest that he saw on the wall. He would recount this in notebooks and notes that he would make continuously from his seminary years onward. He was a note taker and he was a writer, almost a journaler, although he didn't give it that language. Peace within the cell, fierce warfare without. Hear all, believe a few, honor all. Do not believe everything you hear. Do not judge everything you see. Do not do everything you can. Do not give everything you have. Do not say everything you know. Pray, read, withdraw, be silent, be at peace. Remember that last phrase, be at peace, because we'll come back to it. It begins and it ends this great, great set of wisdoms that Angelo saw on Father Rebuzzini's wall continuously as a child. Here he is in his military uniform. He volunteered to serve in World War I, and this will be very, very significant that he does that, and also his extensive involvement in countries in Europe throughout his work as a diplomat and as a nuncio. I also like to include this picture of Pope John or Angelo, Father Roncalli, on the upper left, because it shows him in a mustache. And I always like to see, you know, a pope who used to wear a mustache. That's good. I like that. Then down here in the lower left, you see him in his garb as he would be in Bulgaria. And that is him on a horse there in Bulgaria. The picture below that with the crowd of people is when he was appointed as a diplomat to Greece and Turkey. The picture where he's greeting the little boy, just right of middle, is when he is the nuncio in Paris from the 1935 to 1945. Let me go back and do the years on this. He's in Bulgaria from 25 to 34. He's in Turkey and Greece from 35 to 44. He's in Paris from 44 to 53. And then he becomes the Patriarch of Venice in 44. I mean, excuse me, in 1953. And then on the right, you see him when in his papacy. And by the way, I included this bejeweled crown that he's wearing, that picture, because a lot of people say, oh, he was a poor peasant, and he was. But he did not eschew all of the regalia and the trappings of the Vatican. And we'll see some more about this a little bit later when we see the gathering of the Second Vatican Council. I want just gaze your eyes upon his journey here from basically 1915 to 1959, and just think of this. What made John the 23rd? What made him? Well, he was humble. He really had impoverished beginnings, and he always kept that in mind. He had native intelligent gifts. In his village of Soto il Monte, the kids normally went to the 3rd grade, and that's it. Then they went to the fields to work as alongside their farmer fathers. But he had native intellectual gifts, and so he was afforded the opportunity to go to school and then on to seminary. He participates and witnesses 2 world wars. First as a chaplain and as a medical, he's a medic and then a chaplain in World War I. And then he sees the ravages of what happens in World War II. We'll say some more about this in his work to shield and rescue Jews that were fleeing persecution from Hitler's Nazi regime. Another dynamic that makes him is the threat of nuclear war that breaks out basically in the Cold War between the United States and Russia. And he will see all of this happen. He will witness, he will kind of pay attention to the Cuban Missile Crisis. The last major thing he writes is a thing called Pacem in Terra, peace on earth. And I'd like to think, although I have not had this confirmed definitively just yet, but I'm pretty positive that I could say this, that he viewed writing as a kind of prayer. It was certainly a portal into the spiritual dynamics of life. And he was, as I said already, he was a note taker all of his existence and all of his journey as a Christian and as a leader in the church. And writing as a form of prayer would be one of the ways that you could say that made him. And then lastly, he just abided in hopefulness. My goodness. Hopefulness, hopefulness, hopefulness. He had an extraordinary capacity for being hopeful. Here are the major dates, and I want to teach you a word. I didn't put it on the slide, I should have, and it's called hagiography. Hagio is the Greek word for holy. Hagiography would be a graph, basically, a chart of holiness. And frequently, there is a practice, not just in the Catholic Church, but in spiritual direction from many traditions, of taking certain dates and making them very, very special or sacred, or actually acknowledging that they are sacred. By the way, I've got a typo on here. He was born on the 25th of November, 1881, fourth of 13 children, not 23. Sorry. I didn't mean to burden his mother with more children than she had. He enters seminary at the age of 12. He's ordained at the age of 23, He's consecrated as a bishop in 25. He's 40 years old, basically, 44 years old when he's consecrated. That's pretty young for a bishop. He's consecrated as a bishop, 43, 44. He serves as a diplomat between 25 and 53, Bulgaria, Turkey, and Greece, and France. He's made a cardinal in 53. That's when he's made the Patriarch of Venice. In 58, he's elected Pope. By the way, he was viewed as a compromise candidate. They had 11 votes. I think everybody knows how the Papacy or the Vatican does this. When they have a Pope, they light a certain color of smoke and it goes up and the crowds outside are cheering. But they had to have 11 votes before they voted him in. There are recollections by secretaries and administrative personnel within the Vatican about how he had begun to think of a council taking place pretty much immediately after he became Pope. But he didn't announce it until he had all of his ducks in a row, and it began on the 11th of October. He will die a short, 9 months later in June of 63, and the Second Vatican Council isn't even finished. It will not finish until 1965. Pope Paul VI will continue it, and he's diagnosed with cancer in 62, but he is not afraid that the church won't continue this work. And we're going to get into how impactful the Second Vatican Council was in just a minute. I am not an expert on the canonization process in the Catholic Church, but I have asked and learned a lot. Pope Paul VI began the process for Pope John XXIII to become Saint Pope John XXIII. In 1965, he begins the process. He begins the process and it goes forward. And the beatification, which is when there is the pronouncement of the term blessed on the candidate, happens, my goodness, 35 years later on Pope John Paul II's watch. He will declare him blessed. And then another 14 years will take place before Pope Francis will say that he is going to waive the requirement of a second miracle having been caused by the influence, impact, life, witness of Pope John the 23rd. And he's named a saint at the same time that Pope John Paul II is named a saint. They become a saint in the same occasion. If you want to start with regard to reading, Journal of a Soul on the far left is absolutely a must read. The Mission to France, his memoirs from being a nuncio in Paris or in France itself from 44 to 53 is also from his hand. Thomas Cahill has a wonderful, wonderful book on Pope John and the Penguin series. And then there is these Modern Spiritual Master series, Essential Writings, and that's a good place to also get. So you could do any of these books as an entryway into Pope John the 23rd's writings, thinking, and life. Or you can go to the videos, and there's 2 or 3 really good resources here. I want to suggest the one on the bottom first, which is a very short video clip. It's less than 6 minutes long. It's on YouTube, and it's right there. Just write in or in your search engine, do Pope John the 23rd, Pope of Innocence and Goodness, and that will give you a very brief review, video-wise, of his entire life. But there is a Ed Asner as Pope John the 23rd in The Pope of Peace. And then Bob Hoskins, the British actor, plays the good Pope, John the 23rd. And that is from 2014. By the way, the good Pope, John the 23rd, oh, I missed a Roman numeral there. That's my bad. The one with Bob Hoskins, you can view online for free at the webpage that I've given you, the citation there. These are real pictures. These are not paintings. These are real pictures of the Second Vatican Council. There's over 2,000 bishops in attendance for this. You can understand why this would only be the second one in the history of the Catholic Church, because it is a major, major undertaking. On the left, you see the view down the aisle. In the middle, in this big picture, underneath the platform that's red, and you've got all these cardinals in red on the platform, that is Pope John the 23rd. And that is in St. Peter's Basilica. As I said, he dies in 1963, and this is him lying in state on the right-hand side. And then Pope Paul VI, who is being carried through the throngs of people on the concluding day of the Second Vatican Council. These are pictures of when he was canonized. On the left, as you can see, a lot of priests show up. On the right, you see the Vatican, the square outside St. Peter's Basilica, and the people waiting for all of this to happen. What are the points of impact and legacy for this man who was named the Man of the Year by Time magazine? Well, there's an Italian term, aggiornamento, updating or modernization. This is what he viewed the Second Vatican Council as achieving for the Catholic Church and its witness. Secondly was liturgy. Most Catholics will know this, especially anybody who was born before 1963 and 65. They will understand that the Mass used to be said only in Latin for more than a millennia, only in Latin. But he made it in the vernacular, meaning no one official language. If you were in the Congo, it would be in the Congolese language. If you were in China, it would be in Mandarin, or it would be in another form of Chinese language. If you were in Poland, it would be in Polish. If you were in Spain, it would be in Spanish. If you were in Brazil, it'd be in Portuguese. It would be in the vernacular of the people. And that was revolutionary. So often there is comfort and great stability and enduring pride in going to a church and seeing the same order of worship in Kansas City or in Timbuktu. From Moscow, you could see it if there is a Catholic church there, or in Paris, France. You will see the same order of liturgy. Well, just think, that's compounded by the same Latin words, even if people don't understand it. If you change that, you disrupt something that is seen as almost imperturbable, unchanging. It's almost like God put it there. But Pope John XXIII knew that God did not put it there. That was humanly made, and it could be humanly changed. So he changed the liturgy. The second thing, though, was the positioning of the priest. The priest normally would face the altar and have his back to the people. Thereafter, the priest would face the people, be behind the table to do the Mass. And this also was seen as revolutionary. Thirdly, the Second Vatican Council took great strides towards improving ecumenical relationships and interfaith relationships. Even prior to the Vatican Council opening in 1962, he established an office, or a secretariat as he called it, for Christian unity in 1960, not quite even 2 years into his papacy. And this was to open up dialogue with Protestants, with both Reform and Free Church versions of Protestantism. But his greatest, I think, impact was on relationships with Jews, interfaith relationships, and also Muslims. One of the guests at the Second Vatican Council was Abraham Joshua Heschel. He was a major presence at the council and gave lots of good advice, guidance, and direction to Pope John, as well as to the rest of the participants about dealing with some centuries-old condemnation of the Jews by the Catholic Church. Two things in there that I want to just highlight real quick. Well, more than two. Pope John XXIII had been a person concerned about the plight of the Jews and the way that the world, including the church, treated the Jews for the entirety of his priesthood. In World War II in particular, in 1944, he created a thing called Operation Baptism, whereby he was trying to help Hungarian Jews by giving them certificates of baptism so that they wouldn't be loaded into cattle cars and shipped off to concentration camps and certain death. He ignored a papal directive in 1945 not to return baptized Jewish orphans to their parents. The Pope wanted to kind of, I think, keep those baptized as baptized Christians and not to have their parents reclaim them into Judaism. And he ignored that and sent the orphans back to their children, back to their parents. In October 17th, 1960, he received a delegation of U.S. Representatives from the U.S. Jewish, I cannot remember the name of the program, but it was to raise funds for Jewish refugees and the like. And he greeted them with this phrase, "I am Joseph, your brother." Now remember, his middle name is Giuseppe, which is Italian for Joseph. Secondly, this is the quote from the book of Genesis when there is a meeting of Joseph and his estranged brothers that cast him into the pit that ended him up in captivity, basically, until he could become a pretty big shot in Egypt. So he greets them, "I am Joseph, your brother." Pope John Paul II will do the same phrase when he greets some people in Jerusalem itself. In 1962, Pope John XXIII saw a group of Jews leaving a synagogue, got out of his kind of papal car, and went over and blessed them. Now, remember, this is public. People are taking pictures of this. And they did not take offense, and he was not trying to convert them. It was a gesture of humanity, a gesture of acceptance and grace and love. The biggest thing that he does, however, is that he will have the liturgy for Good Friday beginning in 1959 and then solidified in the Second Vatican Council. He will have the liturgy for Good Friday exclude and strike the words perfidious Jews. He will have that taken out of the liturgy. And he will have taken out the prayer for the conversion of the Jews. Now, did everybody go along with this? Not even in St. Peter's Basilica. In 1963, a priest was reading the Good Friday liturgy, and out of habit, I think, just out of rote memory, repeated that phrase, and Pope John XXIII had him start the liturgy again and correct it so that he would not include those words. In Nostra Aetate, which is one of the great declarations that is really given, Pope Paul VI is given credit for it, but some of the founding documents in it began under Pope John XXIII. And the relations with the Jews are central in that declaration. Let me quickly go on to these other points. He really believed in the universality of love and the necessity of peace, as I've already said, that adage or system of wisdoms on Father Rabuzzini's wall that he saw as a child. It will be taken up by the Pope Paul VI, who will declare in a great statement in the UN, never again war. And he will engage this challenge as a necessity, the necessity of peace. As I've already stated, he was humble. He also had a great sense of humor, and he yearned to meet the hungers of the human family. Regarding his humor, one time he was asked how many people work in the Vatican. They wanted to know the statistics, and he said, well, about half. So he had a lively sense of humor. I had the great privilege of leading a spiritual retreat at the Pope John XXIII Pastoral Center in Charleston, West Virginia. And this was for the West Virginia Christian Church. This is a long time ago, in 1995. So what's that? 27 years ago. And on the wall in the entryway of this pastoral retreat center was this quote from Pope John XXIII. It was so fetching that when I called back and participated in Religion on the Line, which had begun by that time, I quoted it, and it became the motto of our show. We trot it out 2 or 3 times a year at least, and I thought I'd do it here with you all. And this was from what he hoped to take place at the Second Vatican Council. By the way, when he was asked what the purpose of the Second Vatican Council was, he did a symbolic gesture. He didn't just say what it was. He went over to the windows of the room where they were in the Vatican, and he threw open the shutters as if to indicate, I'm going to let the world in, and we're going to see the world, and we're going to connect with the world in an absolutely renewed, refreshed, and vital way. So that's why I got to pick this picture of him probably doing an address to the people gathered outside St. Peter's, but I just thought that it was the closest I could get to that moment where he symbolized what he hoped the Second Vatican Council would accomplish. And these words were given by him as a dictate to all of the people in attendance. And remember, this is over 2,000 bishops, but a lot of special guests. Let us look at each other without mistrust. Let us meet each other without fear. And let us talk with each other without surrendering principle. Let me just say that Pope John is the 23rd is not without his critics, and you can find people that think that he's the devil incarnate, and these are very, very conservative Catholics that hate that the liturgy was changed to the vernacular, that hate to look at the faces of priests, that would rather look at their their posteriors and their backside the way that it always was done. Like somebody told me one time on our radio show, I believe in the Bible in the way that God gave it in the King James Version. The original manuscript is the King James Version. No, and you don't want to call somebody stupid, but they are willfully ignorant. The original text of the Bible are Aramaic for the most part from the New Testament, but also in Greek, and there's Aramaic and Greek, but they are not written in English, King James Version or any other version. They are written in Koine Greek and Aramaic, and that's the truth. That's not my opinion. That's a fact. So there are some Catholics that believe that the Latin Mass was inscribed by God. Well, only insofar that it is channeled through what is called the magisterium of the Catholic Church, which really is the leadership of the Church, the popes of the Church, and others in the Vatican that serve as their source of authority. But it is their source. It is not the source. That's what the Protestant Reformation was all about. That's why we adjudicated it. I don't want to use the word fight, but that's what we struggled over and to continue to this day.
Bob, I'm happy to start. So
Okay.
None of these are meant to be stumper questions, but what was the First Vatican Council and what was that about?
1868, and it was by Pope Pius IX who called it into being. Although you could make a case for the Council of Trent,
okay,
being a council, and it really was a council, but that was in the 16th century, and the nomenclature gets hairy. So the council in the 19th century, in 1868 to 1870, is about papal infallibility.
Huh.
And they had to clean up some disputes, conflicts about who was in charge. One of the statements about the Jesuits is that you can tell who a Jesuit is, but you can't tell them much.
Agreed.
Because they're very, very headstrong, and they report to their provincials, and they serve at the bequest of the Pope, but they really are almost an authority unto themselves. And there was a lot of that in the Catholic Church, and that was meant to clear that up in 1868 to 1870. The Council of Trent, however, was on heresy, and it needed to counter the stuff of the Protestant Reformation. The topics taken up were the authority of the church's doctrines and teachings, of scripture, sacred tradition, original sin, the sacraments, the mass. I mean, it was big. The First Vatican Council was, the Council of Trent was huge. It was huge. It was a very consequential thing for the church, and it needed it for the Catholic Church, and it needed it because of their extraordinary abuses that prompted the Reformation. We think that we have a lot of abuse now, and we do, and the Catholic Church is dealing with that as we go along, as they should. But the abuses have been historic too, with regard to indulgences and people with money buying favor and so-called glory in the afterlife, not only for themselves, but for other people. We forget, we human creatures, that the church is a human creation. So I heard Fred Craddock one time say that in preaching, in terms of authority, we have a basic question: which came first, the church or the scriptures? And the answer to that question is yes. They evolve together. They evolve together. The church is being created as the scriptures are being created, and the scriptures are evolving in terms of what's acceptable. And who decides that? The church is deciding that. And that doesn't get decided until about the 2nd and 3rd centuries. And then we have Martin Luther, a Catholic Augustinian priest in an order, saying that the book of James is written by Satan himself, and thus would exclude it from the Lutheran Bible of his time, because he hated that phrase, faith without works is dead. He wanted to exclude works. You don't have to do any works. It's all grace, all grace. Martin Luther suggested that salvation is basically, you're a worm in the middle of a ring of fire, and the divine hand comes down and plucks you out of sheer destruction through no volition of your own. Okay, all right. That's a real rosy picture of humanity. So, so that's a very brief, rough, and curtailed and blundered explanation of those councils. My apologies. One thing that you have to give the Catholic Church is that the wheels of the church grind slowly. Remember that I said, just with regard to the canonization process for Saint Pope John XXIII, he's begun the process in 1965 by Pope Paul VI. It is only Pope John Paul II in the year 2000, that's 35 years later, that he's named blessed, or what is called the beatification process reaches that process, that stage. And then it's 14 years later that he's made a saint. So the wheels of the Catholic Church grind slowly, but they do grind. They do get to some kind of resolution. It just takes longer than our lifetimes, for sure. They view also, there's something very reassuring, and I'll just give you a kind of contemporary comment about one of the more iconic buildings in our area these days. They bet on the long haul. And we're supposed to do that as people of faith, really, right? Not just personal salvation, but we're building for the long haul of the benefit of the church, of the earth. We should care for Mother Earth so that it can be a resource and a source of support and home for, millennia to come. We should take care of our Mother Earth. The Catholic Church could be likened to the stonemason who was different than the bricklayer who was asked, what's your job here? And the guy said, I'm a hod carrier building this one church. I'm a hod carrier. I carry bricks. That's what I do. Asked the stonemason said, I'm building a cathedral. And how long do cathedrals take? They take centuries. If you go to Chartres in France, you can see two distinct architectural movements. You see Gothic as well as Romantic in the same structure because it took hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years to make it. Notre Dame is in the process of being rebuilt right after the fire. It took hundreds of years for that to be built. Now let me bring up an agitational example. The Church of the Resurrection has a magnificent stained glass window. Oh, I meant to put this in the slide. I took this yesterday at I went to an ordination at Church of the Resurrection yesterday, and in the stained glass window, Pope John XXIII is depicted. A lot of people have criticized the Church of the Resurrection for spending millions of dollars on their sanctuary and millions of dollars on this stained glass, right? There's been some twittering and tittering and tisking about this. I've heard clergy friends of mine criticize Adam Hamilton for this. The issue is they took 10 years to build this cathedral, whereas Notre Dame took 200 years.
Yes.
We don't complain about Notre Dame, do we? We go to Notre Dame, we want to see it. We think of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. We want it to be rebuilt. The better, that's great. Here we go. There we go. Thank you, Brent. Do you see, and by the way, there's a bunch of people in here that are interesting. There's Billy Graham and Martin Luther King on the far right-hand side. And between the branches, you can see Wycliffe. You can see Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and next to Bonhoeffer in the red cape is Pope John XXIII, or Saint Pope John now. So at any rate, I was there for an ordination of a friend of mine, Tino Herrera, and it was a magnificent day. I was so proud of him, so blessed by this service. Heard a great sermon too. Learned all about John Wesley. Not enough to convert me to Methodism, but I learned a lot. That'll preach. I'll steal it and give credit one time the next time I use it. But at any rate, Pope John XXIII was even present yesterday in that great stained glass window in the sanctuary at Church of the Resurrection. The next time you're there, look for him, all right? Because he'll be beaming down on you.
Bob, I think I remember you saying that he was a medic and a priest in the World Wars. Does that mean he was out on the front lines with the
Yes.
soldiers? Or
Yes, he
okay,
was. Yes, he was. In World War One only. In World War
Okay.
One. In World War Two, he leading up to the war, and then he's in Greece and Turkey until 1944.
okay,
And then in 44, he's sent as a nuncio to France, and he's in Paris, basically. But he's in other parts of France. He's a nuncio, meaning, you know, he's kind of a message bearer for the Pope. But Pope Pius, you know, does not come off real well in World War II.
Mm-mm.
He didn't necessarily fight for the Jews like he should have. I should say this also. How would you validate that Pope John the 23rd or Saint Pope John really did act well during World War II? Well, the Wallenberg Foundation nominated for him, and I couldn't find this. I don't think that he was finally voted in the Valley of the Righteous at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. But the Wallenberg Foundation said that he had acted righteously, this like a righteous Gentile, and needed to be honored there in Jerusalem. That's not small potatoes. They know what they're talking about, because they don't do that unless they've researched it absolutely thoroughly. But I could not get verification that he's in the Valley of the Righteous at Yad Vashem, or I would have said that as well. But you know, I'd nominate him. I think he should be there.
Well, I was just thinking that if he spent time on the front lines, that obviously gave him at a very young age a firsthand view of war. And that again, obviously made a very deep impression as he continued forward with those, the lists of things that you had that he supported in Vatican II.
So he's 23 when he's a priest in 1904, made a priest, ordained. And so when World War II breaks out, you know, Italy and all the rest of it, all of that, that's 11 years later. So he's barely in his mid 30s. Did I do my math right? I think I did. He's in it. You're right. At a very early age, he's seeing mustard gas. He's seeing trench warfare. He's seeing people being slaughtered by contemporary, at then, modern weaponry that they had not ever seen before.
Hmm.
And this is to say nothing of what happens in World War II and tanks and flamethrowers and the rest. And then to say nothing of what ends World War II or comes at the conclusion of World War II, which is the dropping of the atomic bomb at Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And they see that, and then they say, oh my God, Pandora's box has been opened. So it's not inconsequential nor coincidental that Pacem in Terra is what he inscribes as his encyclical in 1962, the year that he's diagnosed with cancer. He's eager to get this word out. He dies later on in 63, even before the Second Vatican Council has a chance to conclude.